It's considered one of the greatest and most important werewolf films of all times. It's American Werewolf in London, and it has a freaking Oscar in its roster. So it's definitely in the upper echelons of horror films, but that doesn't mean that it's an airtight story. They never are. It seems like even the greatest movies have unanswered questions, so I think it's high time that we check this one out, because even I get stumped every once in a blue moon. Question number 1. Why didn't the townspeople just shoot the wolf earlier? So the beginning of this film is a bit of the old classic werewolf trope. Someone gets attacked by a werewolf, that werewolf gets killed, but then we see the other guy transform. But this setup is very memorable in the way that it's shot. But we have Jack and David on a backpacking trip across Europe, and they stop at a local pub called the Slaughtered Lamb. The locals there look a bit rough around the edges, but they don't seem to be too antagonistic towards our travelers until they ask about a pentagram that's up on the wall. The mood shifts, they're told to leave and told to beware the Moors and stay on the road. Of course, they don't, but mainly because they're not paying attention. They're not intentionally being dicks or anything, but they find themselves on the moors, and a large dark beast attacks them. Jack is killed and David is mauled, but he's saved by the townspeople from the bar, showing up to shoot the werewolf, who is revealed to be just a man. But that raises the question, if the townspeople were so concerned about the beast of the moors, and fully aware of what it was, why not just go out and kill it in the first place? I mean, it seemed easy enough. There was a bunch of them, and they were adequately armed. And in this film, it's not even that you need like a special silver bullet in order to do the job. Regular old bullets will do. So it seems weird that they not only just didn't kill the sucker in the first place, but that they would need to be so hush-hush about it, right? Well, this one's not too tough when you think about it, but that's a pretty small town. Seems like almost the entire population of the town is at the pub, and everyone seems to know each other quite well. The likely answer is that the cursed individual is a close friend, stuck with the lycanthropy for who knows how long. But sometime in the past, a resident of the town was bitten by a wolf and transformed, and it's like, you know, Nigel from down the way. Like, you don't kill Nigel. You went to school with Nigel. His mom made that mean brekkie, and shooting him doesn't seem like the right thing to do. They couldn't just bring themselves to kill their friend, and it was just easier to stay out of the way. After all, it's just during the full moon, and the creature seemingly liked to stay on the moors anyway. So, on those chosen nights, they just hunkered down, let the wolf chow down on the local wildlife, and everybody's hunky-dory. But then those two Americans showed up doing the thing that Americans do and not taking the advice of locals while traveling and getting attacked. It seems like that they knew that Jack and David would stray because, duh, and felt awful that they were potentially serving them up as lunch to the beast and second-guessed it, heading out to do the deed. I know that they told the authorities that they were attacked by an escaped mental patient, but that was clearly to cover up what really happened, since they're not likely to admit that it wasn't an escaped mental patient, it was just Nigel. Poor Nigel. Who's going to look after his
insert English stereotype here
now? Question number 2. Speaking of them not listening to the advice, why would sticking to the road keep them safe anyway? The boys are told by the crew at the Slaughtered Lamb to stay on the road and keep off the moors. And I talked about this in an 80s Project video I did that covered American Werewolf, but in case you didn't know what moors are, we'll talk about it here. Because, first of all, in an older context, Moors was used to describe either people of either Muslim faith or African descent, basically anyone with darker skin. I found this out when I was younger, when I was talking to a priest of all people who was asking me about a vacation, and I said I wanted to go to Europe, and he told me that it's not that great because of all the Moors. Because yeah, that guy was a dick. But in this sense, the Moors are actually a type of land. The Encyclopedia Britannica defines it as a tract of open country that may be either dry with heather and associated vegetation, or wet with an acid peat vegetation. If it's wet, it can also be described as a bog, which is kind of funny considering what else you can call a bog in England. But it's basically a big open field with no farmland or buildings on it. Just a big empty space with plant life and such, and lots of room for wandering wild beasts. So they were telling Jack and David to stay on the road and away from the big wide open kill floor called the moors, but why would that even guarantee them safety? Was that the right move? Wouldn't a werewolf also attack people on a road? Well, yeah, sure. Like, the townspeople knew that even if they stuck to the road, that there was a chance that the beast would attack them, which is why they armed up and went out after them. Even if they hadn't lost their train of focus and wandered off the road, there was just as much of a possibility of them meeting the same fate. So, why tell them that? Well, it seems like they had a pretty good handle on what to do on nights of the full moon. They all hunkered down, stayed inside, had some drinks at the pub, went right home, and it looked like their homes were very nearby. The werewolf, if it stuck around the town area and the populated zones, the chances of it finding food of the human variety was pretty unlikely. And the town was clearly a farming town, likely with plenty of sheep nearby, similar to the ones on that truck. There's plenty of snacks out there in the fields for a big, hungry wolf-like monster to munch on without having to come into the more populous zones. The chances of it being near the road weren't zero, but they were a lot smaller. So, they were giving them advice to better their chances of survival, but not guaranteeing it. Question number 3. Did they really fake an episode of The Muppet Show? In the now iconic dream sequence that David has while he's recovering, we see him at his house, relaxing with his family. He's hanging out and watching the Muppets on TV, and it's The Muppet Show, which ran in this version from 1976 to 1981. So, this little instance was pretty controversial for a while. Well, I guess not controversial. Like, I don't think the people were upset or anything, but it was a point of discussion that this episode of The Muppet Show didn't seem to exist. Fans of the show noticed that the segment wasn't something that they had seen, even if they knew every episode. So it was thought that John Landis actually shot a special portion of The Muppet Show specifically for this movie. To beef up that thought, they even put Kermit and Piggy in the end credits, saying they played themselves, which seemed to insinuate that they shot stuff just for the movie and were credited actors. Now, for quite a while, fans of the film just sort of assumed that the particular segment featured was just a quick extra shoot for the movie and didn't actually exist on the show itself. However, that creates a real question of, why the hell would they do that? Why not just use a part of an existing show? What's the point of filming an entirely separate fake sequence to use? The answer, of course, is that they didn't. The segment shown is from episode 508 and featured Senor Wentz, which I'm sure was Sarait. The portion that they show in the movie was actually cut from the broadcast and didn't air in the US, but actually did run in the UK. So it's not exclusive to the movie. It does exist. But then the question becomes, why is it on the TV if David's family is in the US? Shouldn't it not be playing there since it was removed from US airings? Well, keep in mind, it's not actually playing at David's parents' house. This is in David's dream. I know it's silly to make a rationale for this, but that's what we do. Silly things to rationalize stuff in movies. It's the whole channel. So if you're like out there and you're one of those out there that's like, it's just a movie, it doesn't need explained, I agree. But I also think it's fun, so I'm doing it. But yeah, this is David's dream, and David is in the UK. It's likely that before the movie starts and earlier on their trip, he was watching TV and watched the Muppets. When he's attacked, put in a hospital, and goes into the dream state, his subconscious brings up the memory of it. And I gotta tell you, those old Muppet shows did have a way of burning into your brain, so I don't blame them. Question number 4. Speaking of that dream, what's the deal with the werewolf Nazis? It's one of the more unusual scenes in the movie, but there's that dream sequence right after David has been attacked. He's in the hospital, chilling, and then we see him back at home, hanging out with his family, watching that aforementioned non-new Muppet Show episode. There's a knock on the door, and when it's answered, there's several nasty-looking demon creatures that are part wolf and all Nazi. They attack the family with a gun, shooting everyone but saving David for last, making him watch the carnage before slitting his throat. Of course, it's just a dream, but then there's another dream where one of them attacks his nurse. But what does it mean? Why Nazis? So, I feel like some of this is obvious, but I've seen enough people questioning it online, so I figured it was something worth discussing. But there's two answers here, and one is very overt and on the surface, and the other is a more subtextual and story one. First off, the simple one. David is Jewish. We know this from a couple of things. There's the scene in the hospital where the nurse says that he's Jewish because she checked, meaning that she looked at his wolf dongle and saw that it was circumcised. In the US, we're all like, it's not just Jewish men who are circumcised, but it's more common in Europe and many other countries to leave the dude uncut. But it's still not so overwhelmingly prevalent that people realize that that's what it means. But the dream gives us the rest of the information here, since there's multiple menorahs up on the mantle. And I think that most people that aren't crazy realize that the menorahs are a Hanukkah tradition, not a Yom Kippur one. So that'll let you know that this character is clearly meant to be Jewish. So, of course, there's that latent fear of Nazis, leading to their appearance in his dreams. Obviously, he's mixing it with his more recent memories of being attacked by a wolf on the moors, blending the two threats together in his sub-C. Now, on a little further level, it's indicative of the animal instinct welling up within him. He hasn't turned yet, as it hasn't been the full moon, but this is a nod to say that the curse is with him at all times, in whatever form he's in. It's tapping into the part of him that embraces pure evil, represented by the pure evilness of the Nazis, destroying his family, something that the curse is bound to do, whether he kills them himself or his link to them is forever broken by what he's becoming. Question number 5. Wait, 2 full moons? In this movie, it's pretty clear traditional werewolf rules in terms of transformations. It only happens on the night of the full moon, and in a lunar cycle the full moon occurs one night out of the month. Technically, it's every 29.5 days, so there's 12 each year. According to this standard in folklore, there's one night every 30 days or so in which the cursed human changes into a wolf. But in this film, and frankly, in a lot of them that stick to this whole transformation method, he becomes the wolf multiple nights in a row. Movies like The Howling have gone around this by having the lycanthropes able to decide when they change and do it at will, but the more traditional ones are always battling this. If they were sticking to the lore, there should be a full month in between the transformations and not 24 hours, like in this movie. So, how is that possible? How does David change if it's not really a full moon? So first up, realize that the whole thing about transforming by the light of the moon is not universal. It wasn't always the way it happened, and it's only featured in some folklore. In fact, earlier werewolf films didn't show this at all. Classic Wolfman from 1941 changed when the wolf's bane bloomed and the autumn moon was bright. It took 2 more years until 1943's Frankenstein meets the Wolfman before a change happened by the light of the moon. But here's how this applies in this film. This isn't some sort of science thing. It's a curse. It's magic. The lunar cycle and the phases of the moon is something scientific and obviously can be traced and charted and stuff. But we're not talking about that kind of thing. Like I said, this is magical cursey curse shenanigans. This isn't you're bitten and infected by some sort of virus that is affected by blah, 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 blah. No, this is a magical bloodline curse that allows you to see ghosts and hocus pocus. So it doesn't have to follow the strict guidelines of, well, it's not technically a full moon. In the terms of this curse or spell or whatever it was that affected this thing, the moon does not have to be an exact full status that we, as people who call something a full moon based on the scientific definition of it, hold it to. Number 6. If David is seeing the ghosts of the people he's killed, then how does he see Jack? So when David is attacked on the moors, he's not alone, of course. He's with his friend, Jack Goodman. Jack isn't as lucky and doesn't survive the assault and is horribly killed. However, later, while Davy is recovering in the hospital, the spirit of Jack shows up to tell him that he's cursed. His death is considered an unnatural death since it was by a werewolf, and he now has to walk the earth until the wolf's bloodline is broken. He tries to convince David to kill himself, and later, in the movie theater, he introduces him to the ghosts of the people that he murdered while in wolf form. He's told that he's also doomed to walk in limbo until the bloodline is severed, which means that the curse is lifted, and since David is the last remaining of his victims, if he dies, they'll all be free. Now, this whole haunted by the specific victims of yourself as the wolf is something that's backed up in American Werewolf in Paris, since there's also ghosts featured there, and the spirits of the people that Andy killed as the wolf are appearing before him and trying to either get him to kill himself or to get him killed. But there's a bunch of questions here, since the insinuation is that if David can see Jack, and it's not who he just killed, but also the victims of the bloodline and anyone who the previous wolf had murdered as well. So, wouldn't that mean that David would be seeing ghosts freaking everywhere? Shouldn't he be seeing all of those that are doomed to wander the earth? Because, let's face it, that's a lot of them, if the curse stemmed all the way back to the original wolf that it originated from. Well, it seems like it's tipped off from a mention that Jack makes while in the cinema. He says that they weren't going to show him the man that was killed in the subway because he was a fresh and gnarly kill. So that makes it fairly clear that showing themselves to the transformed is a choice. Earlier, Jack states that he sees dead people everywhere and that they're boring to talk to. So it's clear that those cursed to walk in limbo are all over the place, but we just can't see them. Obviously, because of David's supernatural nature, he's able to see them, but only if they allow it. I also think that they're able to control the method in which they appear. Jack is in control of his decaying visage, mainly because the rate of decay doesn't really match reality. Question number 7. Was David in control at the end? So the movie isn't just a werewolf tale, it's also a love story between David and Alex, although I have to say that part of the movie is always a bit weaker to me. I just don't think it handles the romance aspect as well as the wolf stuff, but that's not to say that it does it poorly. But I'm getting sidetracked. Anyway, David has a theory that a werewolf can only be killed by a person who loves them, which I'm not sure why he would come to that conclusion, considering he saw one get gunned down by a group of villagers earlier. Granted, like I said, I think that he was actually someone that was connected to them and likely a friend, but that's a jump to go from that to one of them loves him enough to qualify as loving them in a werewolf killing capacity. But in the finale of the film, David goes full canine once again, gets loose in Piccadilly Circus, and goes on the attack. Eventually, he's cornered by the police in an alleyway and remains at gunpoint. Alex hears of the monster loose, realizes that it's David, and goes to find him. She speaks to him, attempting to get through to his human side, and this seems to have an effect. He actually relaxes and seems to recognize her, if only for a minute. But before anything else can happen, he snaps and lunges forward, attacking her, and is gunned down in a hail of bullets. It's important to note that they're just standard issue bullets, not silver ones. It's not like they knew that he was a werewolf and didn't arrive on the scene with the expectation that they needed silver bullets. So it's a definite to assume that they were just regular old lead. If that's where bullets were made of, I don't know. But I do know that they're not silver. At the time, it was pointed out to Landis that since the bullets weren't silver, that it could likely mean that David isn't dead, and that there was potential for a sequel. The helicopter dropper balked at this, though, saying that it was in no uncertain terms an ending, and that there would be no follow-up. And would that they actually listen to that, and the world had one less CGI wolf-filled clunker in it. It also seems to skirt the whole werewolf can only be killed by someone who loves them thing, because I hardly think that any of those cops are harboring any hidden feelings for our American boy, and there's no gun in Alex's hands. Unless they're going with the whole she's there, so that counts kind of thing, like she doesn't have to have the weapon in her hand for it to work, I suppose. But it could also be that David is wrong about that whole thing, and that anyone can kill a werewolf. But they sure are easy to take out in this universe then. Regular bullets work fine and anyone can do it. So yeah, not the most unkillable of beasts. But let's get back to the original question, because two things are happening here. Either David recognizes Alex for a moment, calms down, but then the beast kicks back in and attacks. Or David comes to his senses, realizes that everything that he's done, and that Jack is right, and attacks the police on purpose in order to get the police to shoot him. Suicide by cop. So, in terms of the actual film, there's really no evidence either way. It's done in an intentionally ambiguous way to make either option seem viable. And they are. But I actually think it's the latter because it works more in line with the story of the film. From a writing standpoint, you kind of need those bits with Jack to mean something, or else they're just filler. Why include several scenes of a ghost trying to tell David how important it is to kill himself and end the curse, only for him to just get shot and die from outside circumstances? Those scenes were written in there for him to understand the consequences of what would happen if he were to keep killing, and the importance of him dying. So, when faced with the opportunity to make sure that his life can be ended, in a moment of clarity, he took it. I realize that either answer works here, but as someone who really likes cohesiveness in scripts and for scenes to actually impact the overall plot, that's the one I choose to go with. And now that I think about it, it's seeing Alex and realizing that he loves her that actually causes him to lunge forward and get himself shot. He's committing suicide after he realizes the werewolf can only be killed by someone who loves him. Question number 8. What do the Blues Brothers have to do with this? This is that time on Unanswered Questions where I tell you that this question is more of a fun fact kind of thing as opposed to an actual question. But this is really wild. You see, the script for American Werewolf is something that John Landis had in the back of his head for around a decade. He had been trying to get it made all through the 70s, with no takers. He infamously made a pact with special effects artist Rick Baker that he would do the transformation effects on the movie. They discussed how it would be done. After it seemed like it would never get made, Baker took a job on The Howling and planned to implement his ideas on that film instead. However, that's when Landis got the green light and the budget to make American Werewolf in London, and he called Baker to ask him to join up and was furious to find out he'd taken on another werewolf-related job. Baker quit, leaving The Howling to his protege, Rob Bottin, and jumped over to do the transformation for American Werewolf and get an Oscar for it. But again, I'm digressing, which is a theme for this episode. But the whole point of me telling you that it was to let you know the producers were not keen on making this movie. Everyone felt like it was too horror-related to be a comedy, but too funny to be considered a horror movie, and just didn't know how to address that split. After Universal had decided to make the film, they figured that they had the solution to that problem, and that was to damp down the scary stuff and to boost the comedy. And since Landis had just worked with John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd on the Blues Brothers, what better way to juice up the funny in the flick by casting them as Jack and David? No one has ever said which actor was meant to be which role, although Belushi had more clout in this era, and Aykroyd was seen as a comic sidekick, so I would figure that Belushi would get the greater screen time, and that Aykroyd would be the decaying Jack, but considering that the zombie goofball has more one-liners and Belushi was the stronger comedian, I could see them going with that as well. Either way, it would have been a terrible and ill-fitting decision, and Landis stood his ground and insisted on going with unknown actors instead. It managed to convince them to cast the Dr. Pepper guy.
Us peppers are an interesting breed. An original taste is what we need.
Question number 9. Why don't the other werewolves in Paris see ghosts? Like I said earlier, the first film establishes that ghosts can appear before those that killed them, and the American Werewolf in Paris backs that up. When Andy transforms for the first time, he kills Amy here and sees her ghost, as well as his friend Brad, who was killed earlier. But he's not the only lycanthrope on hand here, as there's a whole clan of werewolves in the city, up to no good. But here's the question. Why doesn't it seem like they're plagued with ghosts that are trying to kill them? With how intent that Amy is on trying to get Andy off so that the curse can be broken and her soul freed, you'd think that these other guys, including Claude, main baddie, would also be included in that whole aspect of things. Shouldn't his victims be around him, driving him nuts, and trying to make arrangements for him to be killed or kill himself? Well, keep in mind that there's several factors at play here. The first is that there very likely can be ghosts around Claude or any of the transformed, really. Like we, the audience, are only being shown the ones through Andy's point of view. For all we know, there could be ghosts all around them, each one shouting at them to kill themselves. But we're just not given that perspective. Sure, they're not reacting to them, but they could just be ignoring them. But also, considering that they've been in the cursed state for a while, there's a chance that their ghosts have been trying to get through to them for some time and have simply been given the cold shoulder. And perhaps after enough time of not being able to convince them to take their own lives, the ghosts just kinda gave up. It's said earlier that the ghosts can choose to be seen or not, so it's probable that they just stopped trying after a while, shifting to be unseen ghosts in limbo until something ended that bloodline and set them free. Question number 10. Is Sarapen the daughter of David and Alex? So the second film introduces a character named Sarapen, and she's played by Julie Delpy. It's her character that's believed to have bitten Andy to cause his transformation, at least for a little bit. Over the course of the film, it's greatly hinted at that she's the daughter of David and Alex, the result of Alex becoming pregnant before his transformation. She was born cursed, carrying on the curse, and it's important to note that this is never said in the movie, it's just implied. Oddly, this whole plotline wasn't in the original rough concept that John Landis had thought up for a sequel. He was asked to take a pass at it, and his idea was that Debbie Klein, the character mentioned by Jack to have had a really hard time at his funeral, would go to Europe to find out what happened to them there. In his version, Alex, Doc Hirsch, and Sergeant McManus would all return, but the studio decided to pass. They still wanted to make the movie though, but Landis didn't want to bother with another draft of a script, so he just told them to go ahead and make the movie without his involvement. The distinction here is that the sequel's studio was Polygram, whereas the original was Universal. They didn't have the rights to everything from the original, apparently including the character names, so they couldn't outright call her mother Alex Price or her father David Kessler. So, instead, they used broad hints. For one, she has a stepfather, not a father, indicating that her real dad is out of the picture, which of course, he is because he's dead and naked in an alley. I mean, not anymore. It's not like they left his body there for like 20 years or whatever, but at one time. The bigger hint, though, is that her mother appears as a zombie ghost and she's wearing a nurse uniform. Sure, it's not Jenny Agute in the makeup, but the insinuation is that a wolfed-out Sarapen killed her mother, causing her to become cursed and walk the earth as well. But the biggest clue and point-blank reveal isn't in the film, and instead can only be found on the DVD release version, which has Claude tell us that when the werewolves were nearly hunted to extinction, the last remaining survivor fled to England, where he was shot by farmers after attacking an American tourist. He says the traveler survived, but was killed in London, and his daughter was born in Paris. All of that seems to be pretty crystal clear who they're talking about, and that Sarapen is 100% the daughter of David and Alex. And also, that means that she's pretty much single-handedly responsible for all the other wolves, since it said that Claude stole her blood in order to infect himself. The weird thing about all this is the implication that David's death didn't end the curse, which means that poor Jack has just been wandering around all that time, still zombied out, and given the weird way that they maybe do or maybe don't eliminate the curse at the ending of this one, he might still be out there, just like being a meatloaf. So there you have it, 10 questions about American Werewolf in London, one of the greatest werewolf movies of all time. And I love this movie, it's just great. I have a couple of issues with the plot line, but not too much. It's a fantastic movie with a fantastic transformation sequence. Let me know if you enjoyed the answers to these questions. Put it down below in the comments. If you have other questions about this movie or its sequel that you'd like me to answer, put that down below in the comments as well. I'd like to hear your thoughts. If you liked the video, of course, hit that like button. If you enjoy what you see on the channel, maybe subscribe to it and hit the bell so you get notified when new videos come up. And if you want to, go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines. You can help support this channel like these guys do. They're awesome for doing so. You'd be awesome for going to do that as well. But you can also just keep on coming back and watching these videos, because there'll be another great video coming very soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.